Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast. We spin the jams and spill the tea, and we're back. We're coming at you today with a brand new 2023 episode. The fourth year of the Jams and Tea podcast is now officially underway. We have released all of our 2022 videos where we talk about the best and the worst and the most underrated. If you haven't seen any of those, go check those out. They're a whole lot of fun. We put those out all throughout the course of last month, and now Riley is laughing at me for some inexplicable reason.
You just said the fourth year of this podcast is underway, and that's like not even remotely accurate.
It is.
It is the fourth year, like Gregorian calendar wise, in which this has existed.
Yes,
but we're like 2.5 years deep at most.
Well, okay, I'm just trying to bring a bit of excitation to the vibe today, because we're all back, and we're back to our usual schedule where we talk about 2 new releases every week, and we talk about what we've been listening to, and we're doing some stuff a little bit different with the format of our shows this week from here on out. So bear with us as we kind of iron out the kinks a little bit here, but we are still going to be focused on bringing you some good old weekly music content. This week's episode is going to be about, we're going to, as we do normally when we start off the years, we catch up with anything that we might have missed in the previous month when we were doing a bunch of other stuff. Sometimes people decide to drop big-ish albums at the very ass end of the year. In this case, we're going to be talking about Lil Sims, her album No Thank You, and we're also going to be talking about the newest album from SZA, Sophomore Effort, SOS. So get ready for the main episode this week where we talk about those 2 records.
Yeah, and just to be clear as well, just so that no one's confused by this or anything, those main reviews are not a part of this video, but they are going to be a part of the same recording session for us, and then the video where we talk about those albums will be coming out in just a couple of days' time. Basically the same sort of thing we've always done, except we're segmenting the kind of riffing and random sort of discussion of things we've been listening to and other things as well, which we're going to incorporate into our conversations into its own thing, so that the reviews themselves are this separate, streamlined thing that is hopefully a little bit more approachable. But we want to know as well what you think of this change in format once you've had a chance to experience it. If you're a regular viewer/listener, let us know what you think of the idea of separating these 2 parts of our recording into different videos. If you like it, if you don't like it, if you have any feedback, please let us know. We're kind of just experimenting at this stage, new year, new approach, but it's really ultimately just the same old stuff that we have been doing, just presented in a slightly different way. So let us know what you think. So we're better to kick this off than what we usually do at this point in our recording session, which is talk about what we have been listening to recently. Jake, do you want to pick a couple or a handful of things? It could be albums, or it could just be artists more broadly, things that you've been interested in, things that you've been listening to recently.
Been listening to a whole lot of stuff throughout this past month, just because, you know, without the confines of the show kind of dictating a lot of my listening, I've had the freedom to go about doing whatever the fuck I want. And as such, there's no way in hell I'm going to be talking about everything. But some specific highlights are, one thing I've been listening to a whole lot of course, being me, is avant-garde black metal. I've mentioned this band on the podcast before, sort of like in the middle of last year. I discovered them because of our good friend Pokegem, who is always eager to give us the wildest, wackest recommendations of shit you've never heard of in your life, and will simultaneously beat your ass until dead. One of those things being the band, incredibly not generically titled, the Serpent Column. I talked about their album Mirror in Darkness last year as being a highlight in terms of new albums, to me anyway, that I listened to. And I went back to that album because that band, which is mostly one guy who is humorously called Theophonos, because of course he is. This
if that
guy
is his real name.
It actually isn't, but I was like, I had to look and do some research just to be like, does this motherfucker like change his name to some weird ass whack Greek shit? Because I bet he would.
My
But
father is Theophonos. I am Theo.
but he has 3 albums under the Serpent column name and 3 EPs. And the interesting thing about this project is that these albums were meticulously planned out way ahead of time before they were actually put together and recorded. And they were, again, masterminded mostly by this one dude. He humorously, in an interview, called them, like, they are, for the most part, bedroom albums, which, when you hear them, is hysterical. Just because, as mentioned before, he combines a particular kind of avant-garde black metal and mathcore that, again, as I did before, I would say is most similar to the Dillinger Escape Plan's first album, but again, with a very harsh black metal tinge. And going through these albums is interesting, knowing what the concept behind them is, because the concept is that these albums are basically the story of, like, inspired a lot by like Greek myth and stuff like that. The covers kind of all evoke sort of like paintings and like classic art that have, like, you know, Greek mythology scenes in them and what have you, just with a kind of blackened twist. Is that these albums are from the perspective of a deity who is ending the world, who is just destroying fucking everything. And I can't think of a better concept for these albums because they all are vicious. I listened to Mirror and Darkness a little bit more, to the point where I was listening to that basically every like night out of a given week, and I gave that the Jake 10 because that album, like, it's just impenetrably perfect. It like genuinely, like, I don't know what happened to me as a human being to get to the point where I listened to this and I'm just like, yeah, man, this bangs. And I, like, if I showed this to anyone who wasn't you guys, they would think I would shoot up a school, probably. Just because this is some of the gnarliest, harshest shit I very, very enthusiastically enjoy. And the other 2 albums are really great too. The first record is this like really seamless flowing project that just sort of has this impeccable cohesion to it, a really great bedrock for the sound here. And then the final album, which I believe is called Cathodos, is this thing is fucking nuts. This is the most avant-garde of all the releases, and the production is even more kind of fucked and intense in parts. And it has some of the most dizzyingly complicated, like, things I've ever heard in extreme music. It is relentless. I had to listen to it multiple times to get to the point where I could say I really think this is a truly great record, but it took a considerable amount of time. The EP that I want to shout out from this band, Endless Detainment, is in the middle, and it's the EP that was born from the Mirror and Darkness sessions. The EPs on either side of this aren't quite as good as the other stuff from this band, which I think is honestly, like, sincerely top shelf for this area of music. Like, I genuinely don't think you can do better than those 3 main records and the EP. But they're a bit of, like, it's very curious. The first EP is produced, like, the sound of it is nothing but the high end, and then the final EP is like nothing but the low end. If you merge these 2 sounds together, you might get a more coherent sounding project, but as it stands, they both have some production quirks where it doesn't truly complement the sound, and I can't say that I got a whole lot out of those, but still worth checking out. The reason I'm excited to be getting into this is that Mr. Theophonos is going to be releasing music under that, his, you know, artistic name, now that he's done with the Serpent column as a project, and released a couple of songs last year on a compilation, and I listened to those on Bandcamp, and they're terrific. I can't wait to see what he does next, but hopefully sometime this year, perhaps we might be getting a project from him. Eager to see if that awaits me because I want to get my ass beaten. I can't believe it took me this long to properly get into this artist, but I've been listening to the discography of one Mr. Flying Lotus. I have mentioned Flying Lotus on this podcast before because I harbor a particular affinity for his most recent full-length project, Flamagra, which is the album that sucks the most, that I love the most. I can't even necessarily defend that in a logical, coherent manner. I just know that I like listening to that album because it's a disastrous mess, but it's also a one-of-a-kind, unique experience. And for the longest time, that was like the only Flying Lotus album I had heard. I had listened to Cosmogramma like long before I even met Riley. And like, because I was stupid, I listened to Cosmogramma and didn't get into it because I was just like, what's instrumental hip hop? Where's the rapping? Why would I listen to this? It's fine, whatever. And then I just like I didn't remember a thing about it because I was a dumbass baby shit when I listened to it originally. So now I elected to go through his discography, and I think I have another one of my favorite electronic musicians in the making here because man, this is a treat of a discography to go through. And it's also it's just big enough to have enough stuff to keep wanting to come back to without being like imposing, but there's enough variety within it to be able to get different experiences from each album. I listened to Los Angeles, his 2008 record, which is fucking fire. God, this shit is great.
That was how I got into Fly Low with that album, because it showed up when I was a lot younger. Probably still does as well. It just kept showing up on like lists of like the greatest sort of electronic records and IDM records ever. And it was just like such a gateway to me into this new sort of new vision and kind of like, I guess, context and setting for what those aesthetics could be and how they could be situated. Like it takes a lot from some of the folktronica and some of the more sort of, I guess, blog friendly electronic acts of the 2000s, like Fortet, for instance, but then just pushes it into such a new direction. And then going from that to Cosmogramma, just two of the greatest like back-to-back masterpieces in electronic music. It's just so fucking fantastic records. I love them.
I would, if you're at all interested in Flying Lotus's music, and at this point I feel like if you're not interested, you should be. I feel like Los Angeles is really the place to start just because it's by far his most accessible. The blend of instrumental hip hop and IDM is both really unique and captivating, but also just lays the groundwork for a lot of what he does throughout his entire career, basically. And it's a really easy to get along with sound. Like Los Angeles in particular is occasionally like a very cold, dark record, but it's like the actual raw sound of it. I can't believe that this thing is like more than 10 years old. It sounds so ahead of its time. And I mean, same thing with Cosmogramma being fucking 12 years old, is that I revisited that and I fucking love this album. It's a bit more like all-encompassing than some of his other releases. It just feels like it sort of dives headfirst into psychedelia, and there's so many interesting sort of moments of collaboration on here. He works with Thundercat very frequently, and whenever Thundercat is on here, vocals or bass-wise, it's fucking amazing. Tom York is on this album, for example. Lots of interesting collaborators, and this really does feel like the widest array of sounds that he dabbles in, just sort of taking something from everything that interests him and putting it into this colossal kaleidoscopic thing. And it's just it's like one of the most rawly entertaining records I've heard. And the follow-up to that, 2012's Until the Quiet Comes, is an album that people are considerably less hot on. An album I just don't hear people talk about in general. And I was like, oh, I wonder why that is. And I listened to it. And while certainly this is the Flying Lotus project that grabs me the least, I would say that this album's back half alone earns it an illustrious status, in my opinion, of being maybe particularly underrated by some people. I mean, Thundercat and Tom York are on this album too, alongside Erica Badu. If you want some cool collaborations, there are moments in the middle of this album where I feel like the more low key vibe that's on this record, I mean, which is the closest I think Flying Lotus comes to like straight up trip hop, is a bit skeletal in ways that I don't find as captivating. But then the back half of this album comes in and it's sensational. So many great tracks on here, like DMT song with Thundercats, one of the weirdest sort of more psychedelic experiments that are it's on here. Electric Candyman with Tom York is also fantastic. Basically, just don't sleep on this. I think this is a really good record, even if it's not, you know, compared to the huge heights of the other albums. But what I have to say is maybe my favorite musical discovery in recent memory is the album, his 2014 record, You're Dead. This is what I think so far is my favorite Flying Lotus album, and mainly because this is a jazz fusion album. And it's like, you're just kind of like, wait, what do you mean? It's Flying Lotus. What does that mean? Okay, but it's basically jazz fusion by way of Flying Lotus. You have these Mahavishnu slash tribute to Jack Johnson jazz fusion guitars. The keyboards on here feel like they're sampled directly off of Bitches Brew. Like all of the instrumental tonalities, it's just jazz, 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 jazz. It's one of the most focused projects he has sonically, and I really appreciate the concision of it, both sonically speaking and from just like a flow perspective. A lot of these songs, like on first listen, it was difficult to grapple with what a lot of this record does, because it's one of the most like, each individual song here is like a minute and 30 seconds, a minute and 50 seconds. A lot of the songs on here don't even eclipse 2 minutes. So it feels like it's cycling through its ideas almost a little too quickly for you to like get a tight grasp on it. But once I kept listening to it for some of the highlights on here, the more I just sort of fell in love with how the project as a whole flows together. It's like judging it on an individual track by track basis is a little, it's a way to sort of isolate it and miss some of the strengths of this album, which is in its flow, which is in its cohesion. But it also has some really cool high profile collaborations, including Kendrick Lamar on Never Catch Me, which
That was
feels like the greatest.
one of the best songs of 2014. I think that might have been, if not my song of the year that year, then it was really high up there. Like I remember that song when that dropped. Definitely not, it wasn't like a huge chart crossover success, but like in the alternative world, that just fucking lit a fire. Because you've got to remember, this was that period before To Pimp a Butterfly as well, around the same time as the kind of earliest sort of teasings of what that album would be were kind of in the works, right? And so we were all really, really hungry to see what Kendrick Lamar would do next, post the Control verse as well. And then he just shows up on this fucking Flying Lotus jazz fusion song that is just the coolest shit in the entire world. It's just completely electric. Yeah, you had to be there, but I think it's still such an amazing song that you can appreciate now, even if you're discovering it for the first time, just how fucking awesome it is. But yeah, I just have to speak up and say
it
that
sounds like the lost B-side of To Pimp a Butterfly. Like it's a little bit zanier even then, but it's so colorful, it's so fun. And then immediately after that, you have a feature from Snoop Dogg on Dead Man's Tetris. Thundercat shows up on here on the track Descent into Madness, which I always love when Thundercat, like he's an amazing bass player, but I love his voice because whenever he goes into like vocal harmonies, the fact that he's not a really great technically gifted singer actually kind of works to his benefit in a bizarre way, especially on an album like this. It's something that like the deluxe edition of this album has the album again, but just the instrumentals, like none of the vocal effects on it. And I like this album so much that I've listened to it twice every single time I've listened through to it. I just can't help myself. I have to go back and listen to the instrumental parts as well. But it's very fast moving. It's very eclectic. But in my opinion, it does sort of feel like the apotheosis of, Flying Lotus working within the album format, taking advantage of all of these different aspects and disparate sounds in the way that I find the most compelling. So I can't wait to listen to that more. It's such an immaculate like vibe. It has a lot of the same tonalities that Flamagra has, but it's channeled into a more sensible and like coherent manner. I'm glad I have both records, but I certainly think You're Dead is the highlight for me thus far.
One of the things I appreciate the most about Flying Lotus, and this is where like discovering him at a formative time was particularly helpful for me, is that like he really just sort of brings to the forefront how much hip hop, and it sounds obvious when I say it, but a lot of people I feel like don't necessarily acknowledge this enough, like how obviously mutually influential, you know, the electronic music that we call IDM of the 90s and hip hop were towards each other, how much IDM and electronic music in the 90s and beyond borrowed from hip hop as well, but also like, you know, there was this kind of symbiotic relationship between the two where the innovations happening within each genre were kind of pushing each other forward, if not in a kind of way that was easy to observe in the mainstream, but certainly kind of if you were a real head, you know, if you had a real ear for, you know, the sound palettes and the shifting sounds of hip hop over the years as well. And then with Flying Lotus, you know, and it's quite telling as well that he had that Tom York feature on Cosmogrammer, because that, you know, instantly, if you are like, you know, if you're as into electronic music as I am, that feature will instantly remind you of the Tom York feature on the Uncle album Science Fiction, and of course and of course DJ Shadow as well, who is obviously related to Uncle too. And so Fly Low right there is kind of bringing you back to that late 90s world where instrumental hip hop and IDM were colliding explicitly for the first time. And so it's kind of like such a neat callback to this very particular niche time in the late 90s where electronica and hip hop were kind of in symbiosis in the most visible way that they ever had been, but then kind of taking you into the future from there and just completely, you know, making it into something entirely new, which is what Fly Low does. And yeah, while of course it might not be until You're Dead that the real kind of jazz and fusion jazz aspects of his composition are maybe come right to the forefront, Fly Low's always been a jazz artist. I think he's always used the language of jazz, or at least the language of what we call new jazz, a kind of modern approach to jazz composition that kind of moves away from the traditional sort of quartet quintet structure of players. That's the kind of the modus that I think Fly Low's always operated in as well. And when I think you approach his albums from the mindset, as we're kind of inclined to do, of the rock listener's mindset, where you're looking for, you know, a consistent experience of say 10 to 12 songs that are like anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes, maybe a little bit longer than that. You know, that's the rock listener's mindset for album construction. You kind of have to rid yourself of that when you listen to a Flying Lotus record and kind of just go into it and purely just kind of let yourself be pulled along through this experience where tracks and boundaries and individual ideas being segmented from one another is not the point and is kind of irrelevant. And it's kind of just this big sprawling kaleidoscope that you get to experience. And it's not maybe a natural mindset if you're super ingrained into the rock mindset like we typically are, but Fly Low, I think, is a great way, as a great artist to listen to kind of get yourself stepping into that world of being able to experience and kind of get a whole different way of like constructing music in an album format, and the album is a journey through disparate different sounds and ideas that nonetheless keep you kind of in an iron grip the entire time. And I appreciate that he's kind of gotten more and more out there with how he's done that and with the kind of extremes that he's taken that to as he's gone on. It's a shame that he's kind of, because he was really prolific in his kind of cool period from 2008 to 2014. It's a shame that he's kind of stepped back a little bit or kind of gone off the map. I mean, Flamagra is the only album he's released in the last, 9 years since You Were Dead. So it's kind of a shame that he hasn't really been, that he's kind of stepped away, because I feel like that means a younger generation has kind of maybe not had that initial exposure to him, that connection to him. or maybe don't even see him as a current artist, but see him as an artist of a previous generation, which, you know, is a little bit of a shame. So I'm hopeful that he'll come back and that he'll be able to make, you know, waves again in a way that Flamago didn't, because it was just such a deliberately antagonistic album. Because he still, I think, is someone whose impact and voice and whole approach is like just so saturated across the music landscape nowadays.
If I have to mention what I think is one of my favorite most recent musical discoveries, I have to mention the other one that ranks up there, snuck in last second for one of my best first listens of 2022, and that I'm getting into the discography of the band slash person, Sade. Never heard any music from her or this band, technically speaking, up until last month. I think that might have been just because about that joke in Shaun of the Dead, where I was just like, oh, maybe this isn't cool or whatever the fuck. But I bit the bullet and I listened to the first album by the band, which is Diamond Life, which I loved. This is a fantastic sort of smooth jazz pop, sophistopop album that honestly, like, on some of the more traditional cuts on here, like the opener Smooth Operator, it's like, this is a Steely Dan song in subject matter, in sonically, like every conceivable fashion, except it has one Miss Sade Adieu on vocals, and she is killing it. God, this woman has the sexiest fucking voice that anybody has ever had. And this is just a great fundamentals album of this entire sort of world of this sound of like this band. Like the band behind Sade is as like impressively fantastic as she is, and I think that sort of goes undersold when, you know, conversations of this band come up, just because all of the instrumental shit on here is fantastic. The saxophone on here, the drums, the bass, everything you could ever want out of something like this. And I am into the follow-up to that record, Promise, as well, though I think of the 3 albums of hers I've listened to, that's my least favorite. But my favorite of which is the 1992 masterpiece, Love Deluxe. This album is sensational. It's sublime. 45 minutes of the most beautiful music you are likely to hear in any genre. The sort of fusion of more down-tempo sounds, the sort of traditional sophistopop of their earlier stuff, and even a little bit of like neo-soul and trip-hop that just makes this gorgeous, timeless piece of music. I mean, fuck me. These are just 9, if not perfect, damn fucking close to perfect songs that are just, they sound, again, out of time. They are so gorgeous, so beautiful, so full sounding, so rich. And this whole album is just about love in its many forms, the power it can hold over people, the how intoxicating it can be, how like terrifying it can be, you know, more platonic love towards, you know, family members and what have you, but like, you know, romantic as well. And I've just listened to this over and over again so many times in the past month. A great album to just kind of mellow you out. I can't wait to listen to other stuff like Lovers Rock and Stronger Than Pride. I know are 2 albums that people like a whole lot. Haven't heard those yet. And I'm eager to see what her 2010 album Soldier of Love is like, just because that came after a really, really long period of absence, like 10 years since Lovers Rock. So I'm wondering exactly what a 2010 Sade sounds like. And supposedly they're working on a new album, maybe.
Yeah, I'm curious to see.
So that might be interesting.
August, anything you've been listening to as of late, or anything in general that you want to shout out, or that you've been enamored with or fascinated by, or just in general wanting to bring up?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I figured I'd start off my appearances on the show in 2023 with talking about a record that is exactly 20 minutes and 23 seconds long. That's right. I'm of course talking about Vaporwave staple Skeleton by Skeleton. This is an album
the single most autistic person I know.
Oh, you haven't seen Autism. Wait till we get to the next bit. So this record is a staple of kind of early vaporwave, and it was something I hadn't heard up until this point. So I just really wanted to get down, listen to it, and I enjoyed it. The sound here is quite obviously influential on a lot of what vaporwave was doing around that time period, what it was going to do. For the record, this came out the same year as Chuck Person's Echo Jams, aka Daniel Loptan, aka 10 Tricks Point Never, and this little doohickey, this little project, what's fascinating about it to me is it's got this very bass kind of primitive stripped back sound to it. Like, this is very pure, just dark ambient stuff that is very empty, it's very hollow, it's very spacious, all while contained within this very short runtime. It's got just a very fun atmosphere to it. So I would recommend checking this out if you're getting into vaporwave and like the aesthetic, the sound, because this does it in a really satisfying way with some very simple techniques that end up being really effective. Like, there's a lot of just reversing of samples, slowing down audio, all to make this very dark, empty kind of feeling space. Next thing, August's second album I'm talking about this year. August 2nd, 1923. That's when President Warren Harding died in office. Warren Harding Sharrock, Sonny Sharrock. Sonny Sharrock is an experimental jazz composer who innovated the use of tape distortion on guitars before Hendrix ever did. So I need to talk about Mr. Sonny
Sharrock fucking rules. I'm so sick you've gotten into him.
So yeah, I listened to Black Woman and Ask the Ages. So some context for who Sonny Sharrock is. This is a man who basically hated the guitar. He wanted to be a saxophonist, but he had asthma. So he started playing guitar. He hated guitar because he thought everyone sounded the same on guitar. So his idea was, you know what? I'm just gonna make a guitar. I'm gonna play it like a fucking saxophone, and that's how it sounds.
Is there a crueler joke that God could make than giving a would-be saxophonist asthma?
I don't know.
It's just not a just God we live under.
No, he's a cruel, demented leader. But he gave us Sonny Sharrock as a byproduct. I really find his compositions, especially on Ask the Ages, which I think I said was my favorite. But that one, the way he just transforms the sound of the electric guitar there is so fascinating. I think anyone who has interest in like the way a group like Smashing Pumpkins mess with just the raw sound of the guitar, the raw tonality and the feel, I think you're going to connect with this, because there's also a lot of like just crazy free jazz shit going on here.
Yeah, so we should say for the record that jazz legends Pharoah Sanders and Elvin Jones are on this fucking album.
This is correct.
Oh,
they are.
They
are supporting Mr. Sharrock, and I have to say, like, just the compositions on here are so immaculate. Like, Promises Kept is such a phenomenal opener here. I love shit like Little Rock too. And also there's like on Black Woman, which is incidentally, it's the same thing, but with like acoustic guitar instead of electric guitar. I don't know how the hell he pulled it off. It's just bonkers. And what makes this so interesting to me is that it's not just that he's doing this weird out there idea. It's that he's taking this idea and he's applying it to something hooky, something practical, and something impactful. And it's great.
What Sonny is doing with his guitar, and I mean, I don't even need to express what Pharoah does with his sax, and Elvin Jones, of course, one of the most legendary drummers ever. But it's a real novelty to hear those two legends, as well as Sharrock, in the context of I don't want to say post jazz, because this album was recorded and released in the 90s, right? So it's an album that features these seminal figures of the kind of pinnacle of recorded jazz,
I get what you're saying, though. I think it's fair to say that at this point, jazz has kind of moved out of the cultural limelight and is now existing more in the hands of underground figures like John Zorn at this point.
Yeah, when you had plenty of like mainstream and beloved and incredibly popular jazz figures, people like Wynton Marsalis, for instance, and stuff in the 90s.
Kenny G.
And Kenny G. But the thing
he
about
was
all
mainstream and jazz. So.
The thing about all of those, like the biggest jazz names of that era, is that they were kind of ruthlessly devoted towards this kind of traditionalist idea of kind of bringing jazz back to the pre-fusion, to the pre-modal, to like the kind of core bop era, basically, and trying to kind of, rediscover the core, elemental beauty of what jazz was, essentially. And so it's telling that for us, the artists that we most associate or that we most love, working in the jazz space and from like the 80s, 90s onwards, are artists like Sonny Sharrock and John Zorn, for instance, who are like doing things that are deliberately as avant-garde, deliberately as abrasive and unjazz as possible in a certain sense as well. So yeah, it's hard to, like, when you talk about artists like Sonny and when you talk about artists like John Zorn, etc., and you refer to them as jazz, it has to come obviously with a huge caveat and a sense
there's that asterisk there that requires some explanation.
I mean, it's kind of like calling Boris an ambient band. Like you're not really right, and that's kind of completely against everything that label stands for. But yet, because jazz is so poorly defined in the current era, we end up using those labels. But regardless of that, phenomenally talented and creative artist. It's just really awesome that we get to talk about him, and I need to finally listen to his albums.
You should do that. So it's been 100 years since the death of Warren Harding. So now we're going to talk about 200, specifically the record Sub Pop 200, but rather the fourth track on Sub Pop 200, because right after the Nirvana cut on this famous compilation comes a piece of spoken word poetry from the one, the only, Stephen Jesse James. And I want to highlight his posthumous record, Prison. So Stephen Jesse James, for those unaware, he was this kind of poet in the kind of Seattle, Washington area. Stephen Jesse Bernstein. He was a very.
That's why I was like, "Who the fuck are you talking about?" You called him Stephen Jesse James.
Did I?
You
did
like
5 times.
Hilarious.
I searched him in the Rate Your Music bar, and
Jesse James.
Who?
I think I've been
this guy.
I think I've been thinking about Pokemon a little too much or something. Meowth, that's right.
Yeah,
Stephen Jesse James. Meowth, that's right. Wobbuffet.
Stephen Jesse Bernstein. Explain for the kids at home again who this guy is.
So now that we have a proper understanding, Stephen Jesse Bernstein was a poet who was signed to Sub Pop Records because his poetry was this very societally rebellious kind of grunge poetry, might be a term for it. But he kind of came up during the point when we were seeing a resurgence in the popularity of poets like Charles Bukowski and what's Naked Lunch guy? Yeah. William S. Burroughs. We were seeing a resurgence in them. He comes up in the scene. Notably, figures like Kurt Cobain and Oliver Stone were huge fans of Bernstein's poetry. And what you get on here is his poetry kind of being read off and performed by himself with equally important Seattleite adjacent figure Stephen Fisk producing instrumentals to kind of put under these poetic readings. And what he's talking about is this very immensely disturbing and intense view of reality, but with a very signature brand of just dark, bleak humor sprinkled in. There's fantastic tracks on here like More Noise Please, where he's sardonically embracing the chaos of daily life and like more noise, the silence is what drives you crazy. It's stuff like that. And there's a fantastic 12-minute not really song but like poem reading on here of the poem Face, which is absolutely destructive for anyone with any semblance of body dysmorphia. Why would anyone here ever have that? Anyways, that one's really cool. Some of the instrumental choices here I think either really work well with what the poem being read is, or they just kind of feel okay. Like when they're blending, when jazz is being used more as a backing instrumental, I feel there's a particular impact this has. But when it's more generic, plain kind of dark ambient-y stuff, I'm not as into it. And a lot of this, isn't Stephen Jesse Bernstein's fault, because he was dead at this point, by suicide even. So it's a weird.
Well,
yeah, I mean
that
that colors it, right? But yeah, that's sort of my thoughts on this awesome record.
The full extent of my familiarity with Stephen Jesse Bernstein is the fact that when I was a teenager, somewhat regrettable, but I'll admit it, I was very much fascinated by the Oliver Stone film Natural Born Killers, which
which famously uses a sample of his poetry
extensively actually throughout that film. So yeah, I was familiar with him vaguely from that. And also I want to just draw attention to this morbid but amusingly phrased sentence on his Wikipedia page. On October 22nd, 1991, at the age of 40, Bernstein committed suicide by stabbing himself in the throat while visiting friends in nearby Washington, although not simultaneously.
Yes, I love that sentence because it's just like, thanks for the clarification. We needed that.
that is like that's the gnarliest way to go out.
Yeah.
Good God.
So yeah, one of those, I guess, tragic figures. But yeah, no, that's fascinating. I had no idea that he had records and stuff, which I guess makes sense. But
there's two of them specifically. The one before this is like I haven't listened to, but I've heard it is quite all right. But the track he's most, I forget the name of the poem he's most, I keep saying track because I'm thinking of like music, the thing we talk about on this show, but that doesn't work here. But it's Come Out Tonight is the one that he's perhaps most well known for.
That's
so
the
if
one
you need
on the Sub Pop comp, isn't it?
Yes, that is. So if you need like a quick nearly 3-minute introduction to him, that's what I'd recommend. But if you're feeling it, go for Prison. That's my recommendation. Stephen Jesse Bernstein for Prison, a record from last year that I know at least Riley you've heard, that being Quadeca's I Didn't Mean to Haunt You. This was recommended to me by a friend, so I kind of wanted to talk about it for them, sorts. What I can say about this is Quadeca was a figure I was, somewhat familiar with through his other internet antics. And while I don't think this record is necessarily perfect, it has a lot of minor things that annoy me along the way that are just like little oversights, I guess, little bits of mixing, little bits of like, I don't know, just small annoyances throughout that kind of degrade the structure of this greater project. But what I will say as a positive is that is kind of a result of this being this very ambitious, kind of all over the place, very emotionally forthright concept album that's for what I had known him for previously, this is a very ambitious kind of shift in direction. I would really like to see him continue down something like this. Oh, and there's the track with like fucking Danny Brown on it, where he's rapping from the perspective of carbon monoxide. There are so many fucking nutty choices on this album that I'm just in love with for how seriously it's taking itself. Obviously, there are some just really superbly outwardly ridiculous and exciting moments. Like you've even got Kanye West's Sunday Service Choir on here, which unfortunate.
And of course, Thor Harris, the drummer from
Yes.
Swans, is on the closing track.
And Thor Harris
Wow.
from Swans. That's right.
The thing
What
about,
I'm saying is, Jake, listen to this.
the thing about this, so I wasn't familiar with Quadeca before
Say
this,
no
but
more.
apparently he's a YouTuber, kind of like a video game YouTuber, one of that crowd essentially,
and had made some rap projects even previous to 2021, which was where I think things got a little more seriously.
Absolutely none of which, for the most part, would give you any hint at the kind of creativity, boundless ambition, and laser sharp focus that this new album displays.
Yeah, and
I mean,
that's precisely what's so fascinating about it. That it, and this very well could be us as people who are not familiar with his YouTube channel. It feels like an out of left field, just bold, fascinating creative decision. I don't know if this is something he's been teasing towards or has had expressed interests like in the past.
It feels really worked on. Like it feels like this is something that this is really like something he's wanted to build towards. It's a record that feels very, very like, if you look at the credits, it's pretty much, you know, he's had obviously some mixing and mastering assistants and stuff, but he's basically doing everything on this record on his own: writing, producing, mixing, playing guitar, playing bass, playing synthesizer, keyboard, arranging, engineering, everything. He's done it completely on his own. And it is remarkable how well it holds together. And like all the little quibbles I have about it, it's one of those things where context matters, right? So any of the quibbles that I have are kind of irrelevant for how impressive it is that this exists and is as good as it is. It's a really fascinating
that's
project.
kind of precisely my that's precisely my perspective on it. That it's like,
and there's great songs
even
on
if
it.
it's full. Oh yeah, there's like there's stuff like
Tell Me a Joke.
I think Born Yesterday is
yeah.
That's just a great moment in the center of it. I would presume you're probably just a touch more into this than I am, Riley, because of a bit of the more forthright, I guess, almost emo influences at points on here, which I'm sure you just jizzed your fucking New Zealand ass pants.
It's hard for me not to relate it to an album that kind of feels like a similar step forward for an artist, but I like slightly more than this, which is the new album from Brakence, Hypochondriac, which is a similarly kind of like very, you know, it's an artist.
I was listening to that too, actually.
Yeah,
I was
an
listening
artist
to
who's extremely
same friend recommended that stunningly.
Yeah,
which shows the similarity.
Yeah, and I think,
but yeah, that's like very emo driven rap, which I haven't heard that in full yet, but I do intend to.
That's a great record. I think it starts off like as this sort of like unconventional but very much rap focused, kind of like he's got bars, he's in your face, he's aggressive. But then as the album goes on, what I love about it is that his production style gets kind of more ambitious as it goes on, and the record kind of starts to balloon into something that's a bit woozier and a bit kind of more ethereal and dense with sound, which I really, really love. And so that's kind of my favorite album of 2022 in the whole sort of incredibly online bedroom sort of artist who is kind of mixing with genres and really, really playing up their ambitions and kind of trying to create this massively emotional opus, essentially. And Quadeca's album definitely fits into that mold, I think, as well. I mean, they both came out around the same time too, so it's kind of easy to muddle them up, even though the sound palettes are fairly distinct. I think that the different sound palettes that Quadeca works with are really interesting to hear the way he collides different influences together and creates these really massive soundscape. I mean, it's so emblematic to me of this massive boon in creativity and ambition that we're getting from a lot of these bedroom artists who now have the means to be able to realize some of their ambitions. And a lot of the time, these records are just about making all this noise and being as creative as possible. But you do get a lot of great songs in the process. And I believe that these artists will, as they continue to kind of hone their craft, they'll only make better and better work.
Morgan, what have you been listening to?
Yeah, what's new in the world of Morgan?
Not heaps that are new, but I did finally, really on more or less a whim, listen to every single release from podcast favorite Lamb of God.
Oh, Christ.
Yes, so nine albums in total.
Iris font ass motherfuckers. I'm just being a dick now.
Shut up. So 9 albums in total. I'll just go from worst to best here.
I have only heard the one we reviewed, but I'm just going to say already that Wrath is the best because it's the only one that doesn't have the papyrus font on the cover.
You're close.
Oh, okay. I'll take it.
Yeah, so obviously worst is the self-titled. Very stupid album. In 8th, we have their debut New American Gospel, which is, there's some good songs on here. It's a shame that it sounds worse than most black metal albums, and it's, you know, a groove metal album, which doesn't really, these things are not conducive. Number 7, we have their 2022 release Omens, which is a substantial improvement on the self-titled. Still not great. It has some absolute ragers on it, but it still feels like something's missing without Chris Adler. At 6, there's Resolution, which I think would be much higher if they had like 3 or 4 songs cut off of it. It's just really untenably long for a groove metal album of this ilk. 5 is Sacrament, maybe their most famous album, alongside Ashes of the Wake. A lot of classics on here for this band, but overall I don't think it holds up as well as the albums that surround it. Number 4, we have their 7th album, Sturm und Drang.
Isn't that the name of the like German magical school in the Harry Potter books?
Durmstrang is what you're
Same
thinking
fucking thing. Isn't it also, isn't
basically
Sturm und Drang also a metal band of some description? I've definitely heard
probably.
Probably, yeah. I mean, look.
Oh, okay, yeah. They're a Finnish hard rock band. They look incredibly corny.
Listen, I don't care.
Their debut album has a picture of a nun in front of a chalkboard with a like a whipping thing in her hand, and the album's called Learning to Rock. Anyway, continue.
Okay, that's pretty hard. Yeah, this album has vocal features from Greg Puciato and Chino Moreno. So I mean, just
all right.
Eating. Number 3 is Ashes of the Wake, the most well-regarded album, I think, but just a couple spots shy of my favorite. But that said, there's pretty obvious reasons why it's as well-regarded as it is. Number 2 is Wrath, which I think Mark Morton, the guitarist for Lamb of God, described this as probably their most consistently great album front to back. And I don't quite agree, but it is very, very close. There are even spots on here where the band kind of gets a little innovative for their sound. And miraculously, it doesn't suck, because Lord knows when they've tried to get innovative for their sound in the last couple years, it's, you know, Randy Bly doing some really boring spoken word type of thing over an instrumental, and it's just gay. So both their most adventurous and among their most consistent, very highly recommended. And at number 1 is their second album, As the Palaces Burn, which
Banger.
God, yeah, that's the stuff.
As the palaces.
Devin Townsend produced.
That's right. I still need to listen to. I remember saying I promised I'll listen to this when we reviewed that self-titled Lamb of God album, and I still haven't. So that's on me. I need to. It's because a Devin Townsend
very
produced
good.
groove metal album sounds amazing. So I need to get on.
Well, here's the thing about As the Palaces Burn: the Devin Townsend produced and engineered version that was the original release sounds like shit.
Bad. Yeah. Remaster all the way.
Dear.
Yeah. The remaster done by their usual guy who does their producing and engineering, whose name is probably like Jeff or something. I don't know where to go.
Jeff Lamb.
Jeff God.
Jeff God.
Yeah. Bill.
Middle name of
Yeah,
Jeff of God. Jeff of
Jeff
God.
of God.
Yeah.
That sounds like the kind of show that you see on like HBO once and you're like, what the fuck is this? And then you never think about it again.
Yeah.
I can't find the dude's name, but it's their usual guy, and it sounds a lot better. And it's so good.
So what have I been listening to recently? So a few things I want to shout out as well, just assorted. For starters, there is a new single, brand new song from Peter Gabriel, who's making a comeback. He's back. The new song is called I can't even say it.
What is it?
Wait,
So-
Say it.
It's called
Let's see.
I'm gonna overstate how funny this
Pa-
is now, and it's not gonna be that funny.
Panic at the Disco.
No, it's called Panopticon.
Panopticon.
So like
Hell yeah.
so the Panopticon, of course, the concept popularized by the English philosopher Jeremy Bentham, the idea of the singular point in a sort of sphere of dwellings, essentially. The idea, I think, usually talked about in the context of prisons, where a bunch of people are living their lives in their cells, essentially, and there's this central pillar that could or could not essentially have someone at the top of it viewing everyone, essentially. And the idea is when you could be being directly observed at any point in time, but you don't know whether or not you are, then you are like conditioned to behave in an acceptable way. It's this prison concept. Anyway, forget all that. This is just me trying to contextualize this terrible pun that Peter Gabriel is making, which is the idea of like panopticon, as in, we are imprisoned and conditioned to fall in line with, these ways in which it is appropriate to behave by our phones.
Phone bad.
By Kim.com.
Look, I'm playing
Kim.com.
I'm playing up this element of it for humor's sake. It's not a bad song. It's good. It's functional. It's not like 80s level Peter Gabriel. It's a decent song, right? It's pretty corny subject matter wise, but it could be a lot worse than it is. It's not Arcade Fire tier. We're not talking that level. It
would be so funny if after the Arcade Fire album he just released a single and it was just an instrumental. It was just, he just evaporated from his own music.
Well, that would be tragic because I love Peter Gabriel's voice, even though he sounds visibly old now. I've always loved his voice.
Old. He sounds visibly old.
It's difficult to do.
It's like free. It's like color.
We are the most annoying people on the planet.
Shut up. All right, look, so it's nice to hear Peter Gabriel's voice again. I recognize that his voice is not in the best condition that it's always been in. If you've heard any of the music he's put out in the last 20 years, that's fairly evident. But I have a nostalgic attachment to Peter Gabriel's voice. He's been a big part of my childhood from the Genesis years and his solo material in the 80s. So it's cool to have him back. New song, Panopticon. is functional. It's just, it doesn't really, it's not a great song, but it's just nice to have him back, and hopefully he'll deliver a good album. He's never really put out a bad album, I don't think, Peter Gabriel. So I'm curious to see whatever this new iteration of his, you know, his current interests turns out to be, even if it is essentially just a Phone's bad album. You know, that'll be sad, but I will probably give it the benefit of the doubt because it's Peter Gabriel.
There are worse things to release than a Phone bad album at this point, unfortunately.
Yeah, I also want to shout out as well The Smile, who dropped a great live album actually in December. Just a selection of songs. I mean, it's hard for a band that only have one album to release a live album because you're just drawing all your material from that one album and I guess just resequencing it. But it was a good live album they put out. It was a selection of songs from their excellent album, A Light for Attracting Attention. And they also this week dropped a Tiny Desk concert with NPR. It's always a cool thing to see artists who, you know, you don't necessarily typically see performing in such a stripped down environment, forced to, I guess, adopt the Tiny Desk aesthetic and just be unadorned to a certain extent. And it was cool to see Tom York. He has this, his whole look was, it generated a few Twitter memes. His look,
immaculate fit.
And his fit with the fucking blue beanie and then the red tinted sort of square glasses. It was just this iconically bizarre. He looked like a fucking, I don't know, he looked like an 80s, a character from like an 80s, you know, Atari video game or something. I don't know. He just looked very bizarre, and it was just a really fun thing to see.
You look like the dude who wants to hang out after you buy shrooms from him.
He just Tom York is in this kind of stage of life now where he is audibly old. That's just a joke from referencing the last thing. Forget it. Yeah. He's older than he
we
has
remember.
That's me having no confidence in my joke, just explaining it immediately because I knew it wasn't funny.
This is a certified Lubdo moment.
Anyway, Tom York's, he is blossomed into this elder statesman era, essentially, where he's kind of like, he is both like, he's kind of shameless now. He doesn't really give a shit what people think of him or how he looks, and his fits, his whole aesthetic like is bad, but like he doesn't, he's such a like, he just owns it in a way that kind of makes it good in a certain sense. Like, yeah, Tom York is doing his weirdo thing, like he's dressed, you know, his hair's been, I don't know what the fuck he's been doing with his hair for the last 8 years, but it's always been terrible, and yet he's kind of just, you know, thoroughly embraced being this dude in his 50s with this kind of long hair. I don't know, his whole thing.
The only current rock star who looks like he bought his outfit at the Gap.
Yeah, and yet like he's doing that, and he's also like
he fell into the Gap.
He's also doing that at the same time as being this kind of like, you know, hilariously cryptic anti-authoritarian personality on Twitter. He just has his whole thing where you just, there's no one like him, and so it's cool to
he's
see.
Like, man, I made in rainbows, I don't give a fuck about nothing anymore.
It's cool to see him now like so completely untethered from the demands of Radiohead. Like one of the songs they play in this Tiny Desk concert is The Smoke, which is essentially just basically a 3-minute drum and bass solo between him and Tom Skinner, essentially. And so you just get to see this dude having the time of his life, playing this kind of bass riff that is the kind of thing that I feel like you would play constantly after your maybe 6th or 7th bass lesson, and you're just like really completely locked into just noodling and nothing else. And there's just something really endearing about seeing him do that. I don't know what it is. Anyway, so yeah, check out the Smiles Tiny Desk concert. It appears as though Tom York and Johnny Greenwood are taking themselves less seriously than they ever have before, and that's a real joy to see. On the less positive side of things, we have, it feels like tragic deaths have just been kind of piling up recently, just happening one after the other in a way that has felt like I haven't barely been able to process any of these. All right. So first off, the first one I want to shout out happened in the tail end of last year. So I feel like we weren't really able to process it. Certainly we weren't able to talk about it on the show. But of course, the death of Martin Duffy of Primal Scream and the band, the jangle pop band Felt as well. But you're probably most likely to know him from Primal Scream. He was that band's keyboardist for basically the entire run. I believe he's on every Primal Scream album, or most of them, if not all of them. He is such an integral part of their sound, of their because you think of Primal Scream, right? You think of the psychedelic, post Manchester vision of British rock music, like this kind of parallel universe of what would happen if the Stone Roses stayed good and also stayed together. And then, all the weird, Americana direction they went in, the big beat kind of electronica direction they went in, all that stuff. So much of the sound of Primal Scream came back to Martin Duffy and to his incredible talent. So it was a massive, massive loss. I want to be able to make a video or something, some way of celebrating him, maybe a Primal Scream Discog ranking, because their albums are so disparate and unique from each other. But before I could even think about working on that, we were then struck on New Year's Eve with the death of Jeremiah Green, the founding member and drummer of Modest Mouse. When I was 15 years old, Jeremiah Green was not only were Modest Mouse one of my favorite bands, but Jeremiah Green was my favorite drummer. I still think he's maybe the greatest indie rock drummer ever. I mean, his drumming particularly on those early Modest Mouse records like Lonesome Crowded West and Moon and Antarctica is just unreal. Like he was such a muscular and visceral and powerful performer. And he's just so much of what makes those records so driving and powerful. And so I want to do something to pay better tribute to him as well. Hopefully I'll be able to do that at some point in the near future too. But that was a tremendous loss. Compounded within a 24-hour frame as well by the loss of 3-6 Mafia's Gangsta Boo, who of course is one of the most iconic alternative hip-hop figures, not just for her features on those early 3-6 Mafia records, most notably Mystic Styles, of course, but her own solo career as well, her own place in hip-hop as this just incredibly visceral, vivacious, and incredibly intense performer. I mean, I probably, like most white hip-hop listeners, encountered her first in Run the Jewels 2 when she was memorably rapping about sucking dick all day on that album. But she, of course, has been such
she like me for real though. Fuck.
Yeah, so I won't pretend to have any cred that I don't have. My first exposure to Gangsta Boo was absolutely on Run the Jewels too. But, she's just been this prevalent figure. She's from the South and she's been this omnipresent figure ever since 3-6 Mafia and her own solo material and in the various features where she turns up in. I am familiar with her from that Run the Jewels feature. I'm familiar with her from a few other features, as well as some of the songs from 3-6 Mafia that she's been on that I listened to in the wake of her death. But I would love to spend some more time diving into her work in more detail as well, because she is obviously such an important figure, not just in alternative hip hop, but obviously as well for women in hip hop too. So, I mean, a tragic loss as well. She was only 45, I think, when she passed away, which is awful. So yeah, it's been a terrible, shitty, not good time for the loss of great artists recently, and we can only pray it doesn't continue. But at the very least, we can take from it a chance to reflect on and embrace their amazing
Alexander and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day.
Yeah, okay. Look, I don't know where
Classic.
my brain brings words from, but it just does.
Well, they bring different words to my brain, and I like to comment on those words sometimes. So, I'm trying to have a discourse, a heart to heart, and I'm not liking the vibes here, man.
Okay.
I'm just here trying to be like Brian Malco, That's my vibe. That's where I'm headed.
Thank you for the Placebo reference, which allows me to bring up the fact that I listened to Placebo's Black Market Music, and also
Good album.
a very good album. In fact, I'm going to say I haven't heard the albums of theirs that I know that you and Morgan love the most yet. So, you know, that's a caveat, but I think this might be my favorite Placebo album I've heard so far, which is their first three and their newest one. I really, really enjoyed this record. I loved the tinges of industrial kind of post 9 Inch Nails and post Chemical Brothers-esque influences, like particularly on the opening track Tasted Men, which borrows very heavily from Dig Your Own Hole era Chemical Brothers. It's very much them trying to do a block rock and beats sort of song, but very much placebo-fied. I love that. I love the whole record. I think really held up as well. I listened to it multiple times. I love songs like Special K, obviously the big single from that record as well, but also Black Eyed is great too. Slave to the Wage is fantastic. Passive Aggressive is I think one of the great Placebo deep cuts that I've encountered so far. All their albums have fantastic deep cuts on them. I think I can see myself heading towards starting to understand and like this band on the level that I've really, really wanted to. I don't think, you know, they have any albums I've discovered yet that I think are front to back excellent, but also I'm starting to appreciate them on a level that's kind of where that aspect of that, you know, attribute of a great band is kind of not necessarily something I'm all that obsessed with Placebo. If they can deliver to me a set of really trashy but really entertaining and fully committed rock songs, then I'm going to take that. And that's definitely what Black Market Music does. It's definitely an album where its experimentation gives it a ceiling, but also is kind of the appeal of it as well. And it would be less interesting if it didn't have that attribute. So yeah, I could definitely go without Spied and Malice, which is the song with the, you know, slightly regrettable rap feature from the dude from She Wants Revenge. Let's just pretend that
we
song
don't
doesn't
need
exist.
to talk about that one. That's
especially because I didn't need reminding that She Wants Revenge exists. An absolutely terrible fucking band that maybe someday we can do a record club on their self-titled album.
Oh, I haven't heard about this. She
like,
Wants Revenge.
Yeah, it's
this
like,
is August core trash, honestly.
It's
oh,
like
hell
this
yeah.
incredibly sort of trashy, sort of post-grunge but goth rock infused, you know, just really, you know,
Epitome
you can tell by the
of
name,
the mall goth music.
you can tell by the name She Wants Revenge, right? It's a fucking pronoun. It's a kind of active fucking, you know,
his
desire.
infernal majesty core.
Yeah, you know, it's you know what you're in for, basically. It's terrible. It belongs in the mid 2000s, and we're probably going to do a video on it at some point. Anyway,
naturally, you know.
But yeah, forget about that. Placebo's Black Market Music, great record. I have Sleeping with Ghosts up next on my Placebo queue. I know that's one that you guys love, Jake and Morgan. So I will be getting to that very soon. What else have I been listening to? Oh yeah, so okay. So an absolutely seminal release in the world of drill and trap celebrated its 10th anniversary at I think last month. December 18th of December 2012 it was originally released. I'm talking of course about the debut album from Chief Keef, Finally Rich. Not, you know, when you think about Keef, you've of course got to realize as well that most of Keef's most beloved and seminal releases were mixtapes, not albums. You know, check out Back from the Dead, check out Almighty So for some of the best sort of drill and, you know, that era of just wild balls to the wall, you know, maximalist hip hop essential releases that I feel like haven't gotten their shine because people still, I guess, haven't gotten over this weird aversion to trashiness in hip hop that is a result of, you know, the kind of blog curated understanding of what tasteful hip hop is that kind of dominated hip hop discourse in the late 2000s and throughout the 2010s as well. We're kind of coming out of that now, and artists like Chief Keef are starting to be retroactively more appreciated. And look, I will say, you know, the thing about any Chief Keef release is you're unlikely to come across one that's front to back perfect. There's almost always going to be at least one or two stinkers on it. And Finally Rich, it definitely has a couple of stinkers on it. I will say only a couple. The big notable one, of course, being Laugh into the Bank, which is one of the most annoying songs I've ever heard in my life. Just absolutely grating because, okay, yeah, it's this laugh that he does, this ha 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 thing that he does that is just the worst shit in the world. But that aside, Finally Rich is a really good record, like a really seminal piece of drill, particularly in its first half, with songs like Love Sosa, No Tomorrow, Hate Being Sober, and of course, Chief Keef's most famous song, I Don't Like, which, you know, if you haven't heard it or you don't recognize it, you will have heard it. And then once you hear it, you will never be able to get it out of your head. And that's not a bad thing, because it's a catchy ass fucking song. Although it's definitely a catchy ass fucking song where, you know, us white hip hop listeners have the struggle of not being able to say its hook. But still, you will have it rattling around your head for the rest of your life. And it is such a fantastic song. And it's so awesome that he put it on the debut record as well. So yeah, definitely trails off in the second half, unfortunately, as a lot of these records are prone to do. But still, it's a seminal piece of drill, and it celebrated its 10th anniversary. So I wanted to shout it out. Chief Keef's Finally Rich. If you haven't heard Chief Keef before, don't start here. Listen to one of his mixtapes. Probably listen to Almighty So. I think is probably the best Chief Keef mixtape, or at least the most sort of beloved one. But definitely, if you don't have the stomach for a full mixtape, listen to I Don't Like, because it's just one of the greatest hip hop songs of the 2010s, and Chief Keef made it when he was 16. So
the only thing I know about Chief Keef is that he has an album called Thought Breaker.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one, but that seems
it.
to be a fairly iconic Chief Keef release. I listened to a lot of great music recently, and I feel like I'm going to forego talking about a good amount of it to talk about stuff that's not great, but just feels more appropriate for this podcast. Weezer finally put out the final installment in their season series. And who could have seen this coming? It doesn't suck. Weirdly enough.
I don't believe you.
I was about to say, the thing about that is that I don't believe you. I can't trust this. I'm sorry.
It is handily, I mean, it's not even remarkable to say that it's the best installment in the season series, because, you know, a fucking phone voice memo of Rivers Cuomo taking a piss would still be better than Autumn, whatever fuck Autumn was. But anyway, this is actually kind of, it's not consistent. It doesn't have enough highs for me to fully call it a good release, but certainly for late era Weezer, it's good. It's probably the best thing that Weezer have put out since the White Album, I would say. I guess some people would say Okay Human, but I like this more than Okay Human. I don't think there's anything on this that's as grating as the low points of that album. Plus, you know, crucially, it is a Weezer release that's only 20 minutes long. 20 minutes long.
Was that a Freudian moment there?
Only 20 minutes long, so doesn't, you know, have the chance to stick around long enough to actually grate on you, you know. And
this man's making songs called I Want a Dog.
Hey, look, the thing about
I Want a Dog,
the thing about Winter is that the true success of Winter is that aesthetically and sonically, it is Weezer not overstepping what they're good at. Essentially, it's not, you know, it's not leaning into the aggressive riff side of, you know, Van Weezer side of their power pop leanings. It's just a remarkably tasteful, you know, for Weezer again, set of instrumentals where Rivers is sticking in with his lane. He's not writing too obnoxiously. He is delivering a really strong set of songs, particularly the last three songs, I think, which is where the EP really kind of cements itself as being, you know, not just mid, but actually being a solid Weezer release. I think the final track, The Deep and Dreamless Sleep, is easily the best song that Weezer have put out since, like, I don't know, LA Girls. It's just a really great Weezer song. Ends the record at a really good place, I think. So yeah, it's you know, it's still, you know, overall as a general project, in general, it's fairly middling, you know, but for a Weezer release, it is surprisingly good. I think that is where I'll land.
Hell of
on
a
it.
handicap.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that if there were to be a post White Album Weezer release that I recommend to anyone who wants to earnestly engage with Weezer, not just, hate listen, but actually look for something to enjoy, this would probably be it. I think there's some good songs here.
Saying for a Weezer album, this is pretty good, is like saying for a terminally ill child, that they did well against LeBron James in that basketball game.
Look, there are just enough moments on this EP where Weezer remember what they're good at for me to give it a pass. Okay, fine. I'll stop talking about Weezer. But yeah, just I have to report that the new Weezer EP is surprisingly good. What else will I shout out? Yeah, kind of hard for me to scale up this dramatically, but I did have one of my favorite first listens of the last year in the last few weeks. I discovered a new band. Well, not a new band. They're an old band. They're no longer together, but I discovered these releases from a band that was introduced to me by Connor, the Japanese band. It's kind of hard to exactly pigeonhole them genre-wise because within the scope of their very few releases, they evolve their sound super dramatically. But it's a Japanese rock band. Japanese rock band, Boat. I listened to their final album, 2000's Listening Suicidal, which is a fantastic experimental rock, kind of noise rock, alt rock fusion of so many different sounds, really eclectic, exciting, ballistic album that brought to mind artists as varied as Otoboke Beaver, Boredoms, and even some of them, even Fishmans in certain elements of it as well. Just a lot of great music on that record. But the big standout was their final release, which was the EP they released in 2001 called Roro, which is, I mean, I obviously had to process before making this claim, but I feel pretty comfortable now saying I think this is one of my favorite EPs that I think I've ever heard. It's just a fantastic set of 6 incredible post-rock, alt-rock, noisy, shoegazy rock songs that I fell completely head over heels in love with immediately, and then only got better the more I sat with it. Particularly songs like Akira Majina and Tuesday, which is one of my favorite songs that I've heard, in the past year. Incredible what this band accomplished in the space of this admittedly 40-minute EP that allows them to really explore their sound, or at least, the disparate styles that I've encountered from them, but really honed into the specific singular vision that I think makes for a really compelling and potent and powerful project from front to back. Great melodies, great guitar tones, great performances. It has a kind of a lo-fi aesthetic to it, but there's just so much heart in it. So much kind of, in fact, in that kind of aggressive but blissful Sunbather-esque sort of, relentless, noisy joy, I was reminded of, the new wave of noisier shoegaze bands that we talk about, like Paranormal by way of Deaf Heaven and that sort of thing. Not as aggressive as those projects can be, but certainly having a similar sort of, blown out, colorful, vibrant aesthetic. That means I was bound to love it, but was really still taken aback by how much I loved it. So yeah, Boat, Roro, and Listening Suicidal get a massive recommendation from me. Amazingly, these are on streaming, despite the fact that for a long time they weren't. So go and check them out. They're fantastic, and I absolutely love them.
That EP's pretty fucking great. I've been listening to that a lot as well.
Last couple of things I will shout out is that I listened to the Joni Mitchell album Hejira, which is, of course, from her later 70s era, where she kind of moved away from the fairly standard acoustic singer-songwriter stuff that she cut her teeth on into a realm that fused her songwriting style and her typical delivery style with elements of jazz and elements of folk rock. Definitely feels like her most accomplished album compositionally that I've heard. These songs, definitely Joni and her storytelling, and particularly her character-based storytelling, is the central focus here. But these arrangements, particularly elevated by the element of Jacob Astorius's bass playing and Larry Carlton's guitar playing, fantastic. It's a languorous record. It's a record that is not necessarily particularly immediate. And if you go into it expecting or wanting something really, really driving, you might be left cold a little bit at first. But these arrangements are so intricate and beautiful and meld so
lushly with the stories that Joni is telling. That is an album with great staying power. Gets a very strong recommendation from me. I had a beautiful time with it. I also listened to the Kinks album, Arthur, or The Decline and Fall of the British Empire, another great Kinks record from their kind of imperial era. This particular songwriting style of Ray Davies as well, where it's intensely, bitingly critical of British society and British cultural norms and ways of living as well, in a similar way to how their, canonical classic Village Green Preservation Society is, although this record is slightly less, I would say, nuanced and slightly less kind of humorous in its approach to that particular style of satire. And this is just a little bit more kind of dripping with venom. Like, this is just an outright angry album that's very blunt about the things that it is about. Very much kind of tearing down these aspects of the established class system in Britain and the way in which British society reinforces and strongly condemns and shuns anyone who veers away from these established standards of the roles that men and women and people of particular classes and cultures play in British society. Ray is just really fucking pissed off on this album, basically, and there's no dressing it up. And that's an aspect that I think lends it an immediacy and a kind of biting kind of viscera that their previous records might not have in the same way, but also isn't quite as much my favorite version of the Kinks, just because I think some of the wit and some of the kind of like tongue-in-cheek aspects of Village Green that I really, really loved are sanded off a bit here for this visceral approach. So it doesn't quite connect with me as strongly, but there's still great songs on here, still classics on here, like Victoria, like Australia, like Shangri-La, and the fantastic title track that closes it out as well. Wonderful deep cuts as well, some underrated songs on here like Drivin' and Nothing to Say. I do really, really enjoy this album. It's another great Kinks record. It's not my personal favorite brand of the Kinks as a whole, but I think that if you want to get a good idea of this band at their most kind of raw and just kind of biting, then this album will give you a good dose of that. Yeah, really, really good album. I'm gonna continue my dives through the Kinks as well, listen to Lola versus Power Man very soon, and we are going to talk about the Kinks and a record club somewhat soon down the line as well. So you're going to get plenty of Kinks content eventually, but I did want to shout this out because it was another great Kinks record, and I was glad that I spent some time with it. Last thing I will shout out is that the first album I listened to, my first listen of the year, was Failure's album, Fantastic Planet. A kind of alt grunge staple that for whatever reason I hadn't listened to, despite the fact that we spent basically all of 2021 talking about various different grunge staples within the early 90s at least, and the fact that I'm already a fan of a number of kind of grunge bands post that initial era who kind of took the grunge sound in new directions, bands like Afghan Wigs, for instance. And of course, we talked about the most recent Failure album in our Overlooked Albums of 2021 video as well. Still, despite all of that, somehow I never got around to listening to Failure's most classic and beloved album, Fantastic Planet, until now. Really glad I did. This is a wonderful album. It's an album with a curious structure. Starts off very strong with some classic grunge tracks like Saturday Savior, Sergeant Politeness, the fantastic Smoking Umbrellas. And it actually does a pretty good job of fairly consistently sustaining you with great songs as well. Dirty Blue Balloons and Solaris in the midsection are fantastic sort of deep cut tracks as well. And then you just get this string at the end of this album, the last 5 songs on this record, where all of a sudden this band decides to just make a series of perfect songs just out of nowhere. The Nurse Who Loved Me, another Space song, Stuck on You, Heliotropic, and Daylight. An incredible run of music that takes this album from being a pretty great grunge record to being a kind of seminal kind of pillar of the genre, essentially, in its final stretch. So yeah, it's a bit strange that it's structured in that way, and I can't deny that it could be tightened a little bit more by cutting some of the less essential moments. It is a long album, but man, is it worth it for that final stretch. It really feels as though you're rewarded for sticking with this band through their various experimentations and through their different permutations of their alt rock grunge-esque sound, because you just get that final stretch of immaculate music at the end that just completely canonizes the album. It's a bizarre way of structuring it, but I mean, it works. It took a couple of listens for me to fully, get my head around the entirety of the record, but once I'd done that, I was completely on board. Amazing album. Definitely deserves to be up there with the, I guess, post grunge, but sort of alt rockier, sort of a little bit more experimental bands like Afghan Wigs and Hum, for instance, who were doing interesting things in the wake of grunge's implosion. I'm fully on board with Failure now. Last but not least, I thought it would be cool for us to kind of going into this year to just sort of briefly shout out some records that we're looking forward to, or artists that we hope drop or are anticipating this year. We don't have to go into in depth, but just sort of mention artists that have got an album lined up or are about due to have something released that we're looking forward to. Jake, why don't you go first?
All right. The first entry here is with a bit of a caveat, just because we don't know a whole lot about, or at least I personally don't know a whole lot about this upcoming album. And their last release was a bit controversial, but that does make me at least a little bit excited to see what they come up with. And that is supposedly that Baroness are dropping a new album this year. And Baroness are one of the most vital, pivotal sort of sludge metal, heavy metal bands of the 2010s, in my opinion. They have a great string of records. Their sort of Colors series, Red is a terrific album, Blue is very good. I think Yellow and Green is particularly underrated, and Purple is one of my favorite heavy metal albums of all time. And Golden Gray was their most recent album, and that was a bit of a controversial release because the producer of that album, Dave Fridman, who did also produce Purple, lent a specific noisier, kind of grimier edge to their sound on that record. And they kind of doubled down on Golden Gray to the point where it made it borderline unlistenable. The production on that album is so blown out. It's so loud. It's so rough. It's so demo-like that it obscures a lot of what the strengths of the band are, but a lot of material on that record still, I think, is fundamentally super strong. I think that if the production was better on that album, it would be a lot more fondly remembered, which is why I'm hoping for this new release in 2023 that maybe the band will sort of pivot back to maybe I don't want to say a safer sound, more really just a more coherent sound. Just I don't really care which sect of their musical subgenre they elect to focus on. I just really hope that what they pull through with is solid, as it always has been. Maybe just, they've done a couple of things, again, Yellow and Green is a double album, and they've had Golden Gray being the album that it was. So I'm just hoping that maybe a safer pivot here is the smarter way to go. So fingers crossed for that.
Particularly, I'll just say I'll just add as well, that record, which I think, deserves to be reevaluated to some extent as well. I mean, it's not necessarily that it's badly produced, because it's produced in the same way that Fridman produces some of those more out there Flaming Lips records like Embryonic, as well as albums like Sleater-Kinney's The Woods. He's done that exact production style for rock bands looking to really kind of lean into this intense and just sort of broken sound. It just wasn't a good fit for what the band were doing with that particular record, and it kind of hindered the songs in that way. So yeah, and I know that's kind of what you were getting at as well. But
he did that on Purple.
Yeah,
he did
exactly.
That.
And also the other thing is Golden Gray was the first album they had with Gina Gleason as a guitarist as well. And it was a real shame that her contributions and what she was adding to the band kind of end up getting overshadowed by this whole conversation about the production and all that sort of stuff as well, because her guitar playing is fantastic on that record, and she's a great addition to the band. And so it's a shame that that wasn't really something that we were able to celebrate that much. So it would be cool to see, hopefully, if they do put out a new record this year, which I hope they do, hopefully we'll be able to talk less about how it sounds and more about what a great band Baroness are.
Yes. And another album I'm looking forward to is from an artist who's had a really eclectic career thus far, and I've really been a fan of their most recent 2 records, that being the neo-psychedelic art rock artist Eve Toomer. Their most recent record, Heaven to a Tortured Mind, I got into a bit after it was released at the end of 2020. It took a while to grow on me, but now I would say that that's actually probably one of my favorite albums. It's just such a unique combination of neo-psychedelia, of glam rock, of psychedelic soul, and there's literally just nothing that sounds like it. And in 2018, they came out with the album Safe in the Hands of Love, which is like a way more hypnagogic, experimental kind of deconstructive album that was still no less really entertaining and really fascinating to listen to. So the prospect of there being a new Eve Toomer album is really interesting, just because they're an artist that is so unpredictable that there's no telling what this could even be like. But the single that's been released, and I think it's for the upcoming album, God is a Circle, is a fantastic song. I can't wait to see how it fits into the overall sound of this new record. And just generally speaking, they are an artist to watch. I think that a lot of what they do in terms of how they deal with sexuality in their work, the way it's very very Bowie derivative in his heyday. Again, there's a bit of glam rock kind of androgynous kind of quality to their music that's just very innately super compelling. Their last album I would describe as being like a psychedelic Prince album. It's very cool. Their albums are typically very tight. So I have no reason to expect anything less than something excellent for whatever this new album is going to be. And if I have to pick another thing that I'm looking forward to, this is a bit more amorphous, just because we know even less about this than we would any kind of release that's supposed to release this year. And that being that we are supposed to get a new project from Boy Genius, not just from Phoebe, Lucy, and Julian, but from all 3 of them. They have collaborated previously on their self-titled Boy Genius EP, one of my favorite EPs of all time. They are their own little collective. They've made projects since that EP, again, projects like Punisher, projects like Home Video, Little Oblivions, what I would consider to be great artistic steps forward for their own sound. So I'm curious to see how they have grown since then and how that's going to intermingle on a project. Not to mention, I mean, people have been clamoring for a full-length Boy Genius project since the EP came out. So we're hoping that it's that. It might be another EP. We're not really sure thus far, but we can dream. I am the most avowed Boy Genius person on here, which is no small feat considering we're the 2 of you. I know we're pretty big fans as well, but obviously we're going to be looking forward to anything these 3 girls are going to make. Please give it to me, please. I'm no longer asking.
In terms of what I'm excited for, the 3 picks I've gone with are one that is concrete and quite soon, one that is probable, and one that is I'll believe it when I see it, but we're manifesting. The quite soon one is the new release from Paramore, This Is Why. Just
Yes.
It's been 84 years.
Jesus.
We've been waiting, Haley.
I love you guys. Take all the time you need, but how many goddamn hiatuses am I supposed to sit through for this band?
Also, like, it was the title track lead single was a great song immediately when it released.
Yes.
But man, has that thing just stayed with me constantly.
Mhm.
Like, I can get that shit stuck in my head without even listening to it. And, you know, not that I haven't gone that long without listening to it, but it's just such a fucking fantastic song.
Yeah, so there's that. The one that is, I think, probable is a new album from The National. Nothing announced yet, but they've been playing new live material. There was the release of Weird Goodbyes last year.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it seems likely, just waiting on an announcement at this point. And the one that we're manifesting is a new album from the fucking Cure.
Yeah, I was hoping you would say
Guys.
this.
Please, God.
Apparently, like Robert Smith has said multiple times that the whole album is done, it's recorded, it's ready to go.
What are you?
They've been
waiting
playing it
on?
live. They've been playing like multiple songs
Shit.
live. I don't know why the album's not out yet.
I didn't know this, but apparently I didn't know that Reeves Gabriel joined The Cure semi recently and has been playing with them. What?
I don't know what to say. All I can say is, I mean, surely we get it this year. I don't understand. I'm very weary about this, but they said it was going to be released before they started their tour in November. And they started their tour in November and it wasn't released. We know that it's called, I think, Songs for a Dead World or Songs for a Lost World or something like that.
Songs for a Lost World, I think.
All right, there we go. I mean, they did actually, Robert Smith has said that they've actually recorded 2 albums, but you know,
Christ.
yeah, right. We'll just see what happens. Whether
Show
we get either of them.
me the baby.
Yeah. As for me, then, my 3 anticipated records, 2 of these are confirmed. The third one is basically as good as confirmed. So that's good. I'm not reaching into the abyss too much here. In fact, we have release dates for 2 of these. The first one, and this is definitely my most anticipated album of the year, which is funny because it is from a band that I haven't ever really loved before. In fact, a band that I've struggled to even like that much before. No, that's not true. I've liked them, but I've always kind of been struggling to see the intense love that some people have for this band. I've wanted to get there. The band is Young Fathers. I've really enjoyed previous records that they've done, especially White Men or Black Men Too, and that last one they put out, Cocoa Sugar. I think those are good records that have good songs on them. But then these singles dropped for this upcoming album, which is coming out incidentally on the 3rd of February. It's called Heavy Heavy.
Oh, wow.
And the singles for this album are amazing. Like, I restrained myself from forcing these songs into the high end of my songs of the year list as well, just because I wanted to not blow the load too much. But essentially, these singles for this album have been amazing. The fullest sound this band has ever had. I think gone is the sort of sparseness and kind of somewhat unfinished feeling of some of their music that's kind of left me a little cold. These new songs are massive. Geronimo, I Saw, Tell Somebody, they kind of remind me a little bit of Algiers, like earlier Algiers, who also have an album coming out this year that I'm curious to see how that turns out. But like really turned up, like it reminded me of that Underside of Power era Algiers, somehow louder and more ferocious and intense than they were. This kind of gorgeous fusion of this powerful vocal work, this obviously gospel inflected and influenced sound with the intense kind of aggressive electronic aspect that they flirt with. And these songs are fucking massive. All 3 of them are huge as hell. And the album's called Heavy Heavy. It's coming out on the 3rd of February. It looks like a tight 10 tracks, 32 minutes. I'm very excited to see how this turns out. It has a real potential to be one of my favorite albums of the year if the other tracks are as good as the singles are. So I'm very much looking forward to that. My second anticipated record is coming 1 week later than that. On the 10th of February, we finally get a new album from the alternative R&B / I guess She flirts a lot with kind of aspects of garage and UK bass, despite being an American artist. She is, of course, Kalila. Her 2017 album, Take Me Apart, was one of my favorite albums of that year. One of my favorite R&B records of the 2010s in general. She's an amazing vocalist. She certainly dwells more within the kind of atmospheric side of R&B. Doesn't have a lot of muscularity necessarily to the music, but that's not a critique at all. Her record is breathtaking. The songs that she's put out for this new record, which is called Raven, are equally breathtaking as well. She is one of my favorite R&B artists currently working today, and because it has been 6 years since her last record, I am incredibly highly anticipating this new album. So check out the songs, check out Take Me Apart if you haven't heard it. It is a modern classic of alternative R&B. Amazing songs on that record. Very excited to see how the new album turns out. And my final pick is not an album that has been confirmed, but it is a band that have said, we are putting out a new album this year. It is happening. It's recorded. It's done. They've already started kind of publicizing it and kind of hinting at, teasing some of the maybe music videos and visuals that they're going to be dropping. So I feel very confident this is going to happen. And it is also this band's first new album in 24 years. I'm talking about the fantastic sophistopop / down-tempo pop band Everything But the Girl, who are coming back with a new album this year. As yet untitled, we don't know the name of it. I think, did I read somewhere that it was going to be called, I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that it was going to be called Fuse, but I don't know if that's been confirmed. But I'm very excited for this. Everything But the Girl are a seminal down-tempo sort of low-key folk adjacent electronica band from the 90s who basically ended their run getting better and better and better with each record they put out. Of course, this is the husband and wife couple of Tracy Thorn and Ben Watt. Tracy being one of the best vocalists of the 90s, one of my favorite singers of the 90s. You may know her from Massive Attack's Protection, among other things as well. And so they basically had a string of records, Amplified Heart, Walking Wounded, and Temperamental in the 90s that are, I love all three of them. They're fantastic, beautiful visions of electronic, down-tempo music that is evolving from the world of sophistopop that they originally started out in, but also just super exciting minimal techno as well. So I'm really, I'm very intrigued to see where they pick up from. In terms of how they resume their sound, what they do, whether they change things up, what they plan to deliver in the year 2023. They've been very vocal on their Twitter and very excited about their new album, so that's great to see. I'm very, very much looking forward to that. Those are my 3 picks. August, what are your picks for records you're looking forward to or artists that you hope release music in 2023?
Oh man, I've got some things I'm looking forward to. Let's start it off. We're gonna start it off with a band who I think we're very openly all looking forward to discussing again. That's of course Metallica. I'm looking forward to 72 Seasons. The lead single Lux Eterna sounds like every other fucking Metallica song mashed together, and like, you know what, I'm for it. I really don't give a shit. I just want more Metallica, because some of the most fun this podcast has been talking about Metallica.
That's a beautiful
Absolutely.
reason to look forward to a new Metallica album as well, because we have had so much fun talking about them. Also, this is James Hetfield's childhood trauma album.
With
very much
72 seasons,
Really?
18 years.
Yeah.
The idea behind the title 72 Seasons is if you divide that by 4, it comes out to 18. So 72 seasons is 18 years. Which is
Metallica's 14 autumns and 15 winters.
Fuck yeah, man. I'm
Look,
with such songs,
respect for them going into this far in their career and still being conceptual.
Well, look, some of James Hetfield, not a person we associate with songwriting necessarily or like poignancy, but does have some poignant songs that have been written about his childhood, have been written about, the difficulties he experienced.
Invisible Kid. for example.
I was thinking more along the lines of, the god that failed or whatever. But
I think that's Riley. That's precisely the reason this is going to be so exciting, because quite frankly, with Hetfield's schizophrenic quality, I think we could see either a perfectly
Frantic,
passable,
you might say.
Frantic, yeah, TikTok. That was good. Well done. I think we could see look, whatever we're gonna get here is gonna be fucking interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited
with
for
such
that.
song titles as "If Darkness Had a Sun."
Oh, fuck yeah.
Fuck
Also-
off.
Also, "Too Far Gone?" Question mark.
Shut the fuck
Screaming
up.
suicide. You
it's-
must burn. It's a double album as well, 80 minutes long. It's gonna be pure Metallica. Can't
I
wait.
think we expected it to be a double album. Like, there's no way it was gonna be a sensible runtime ever.
For a lead single, Lux Eterna I thought sounded good. It wasn't like Atlas Rise level good, like that really got you excited for Hardwired, but it's still a pretty good song. And also, quite notably, it is by far the shortest song on the album. This is definitely a record where you're having 8-9 minute Metallica songs.
No, I'm very much expecting Lux Eterna to not at all be representative of what the rest of it sounds like, which really just amplifies the mystery of it. I cannot wait for April 14th.
It's just in time for my birthday, which is only a few days earlier. The single art, I love the single art.
Oh
so much.
yeah, the
It's just
single
this-
art.
It's just this kid going like, yeah, like this, and then his shadow is the Metallica logo. It's fucking amazing.
Shit,
I
yeah.
just need you all to understand that I typed in Metallica into the Rate Your Music search bar to see the single art, which, by the way, hilarious. But I typed it in, and there's just a band called Metallica 2.
Hell yeah.
Yes!
Okay,
Yes.
an artist I'm looking forward to is the one, the only, the Mr. King Tuff, an artist whose records before this I have really enjoyed. I find records like The Other and Black Moon Sun. They've got this really kind of
Won't you come?
kitschy. Won't you come? But they've got this really great kind of kitschy blend of almost like Beck and psychedelia stuff. He's a fun kind of chill.
The Other is notably in August 10.
It is indeed. He's got this album coming out called Small Town Stardust. Now, I have not been crazy about the singles, but I'm holding out hope that the record itself is good. That'll be coming to us in late January, so
yeah,
we'll hear
that's
back
right.
on that pretty soon.
Sick.
And there's two more I wanted to shout out. One of these is going to go by quickly. It's MGMT. I am very much hoping for a drop from them this year. They are like King Tuff, another group who last put out an album in 2018 that myself and Mason were listening to a ton on the bus. These are just a pair of very nostalgic, sentimental artists for me, because they were the MGMT and King Tuff are these musicians and groups who got me really excited about the process of making music and led me to, Glacier Flower, this podcast. Everything. These are just two very seminal, important artists to my growth as a music fan. So whether they put out something this year at all, and if it's good,
They did announce, not formally, but they did say I think there was a Reddit AMA that Andrew Van Wingarden was doing, where he kind of let it slip that they had recorded a new record, or they have a new record kind of in the works at the very least. And
thank God. I didn't research this at all, so I was just kind of freebasing.
No, they
and
have been
hoping that
working
they
on
were.
new music, and they were even teasing it. I think they wanted to release something in 2022, but it didn't end up happening. So it seems like a fairly safe bet that we will get some new music from them this year for sure.
Yes. So
Little Dark Age
that
is
is
amazing.
Yes, it was. That's something I am looking forward to. And my final thing, just as a quick note, it's coming out February 24th, but a new Godsmack album is upon us. Godsmack
Oh,
being a
please,
trash.
let's review that on the show.
Godsmack are like the biggest trash tier fucking hard rock kind of they're like this really like post grunge post like shit Metallica band. They fucking rule. When
Godsmack,
legends
you Black
ride,
Emperor.
yeah, God smack me on the nuts and
God
get me
smack my
hard.
bitch up by the Prodigy. Anyway, I've never heard of this band, but they're exactly what
You've
I
never heard
expected.
of Godsmack? Oh my
Oh,
god.
maybe. I
Fuck.
don't know. I
One
not
sec,
consciously.
you gotta listen to fucking Unforgettable. That's a banger.
I hope it's a Nat King Cole cover.
You're unforgettable.
Morgan, we're talking about Godsmack. Riley's never heard of Godsmack before.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I've heard of them. I've definitely never consciously heard that. Maybe I have. I don't fucking know.
You very well might have because the lead singer sounds almost identical to James Hetfield. Like,
okay.
I mean, just like Chad Kroeger, James Hetfield, perfect intersection of these two people.
yeah, that is exactly what he sounds like.
Jesus Christ.
There's
What
absolutely
is
nothing notable about this band.
And
That's I find that very affirming to hear.
that is precisely why I thoroughly enjoy their fucking pathetic nothingness.
And they've been on a downward decline throughout the decade too, so it'll be interesting to see if that even continues.
Yeah, no, they've somehow gone from sounding like nothing to like bad nothing, which is
like you listen to one of their newer albums and then it like erases part of your memory.
imagine like white noise, but that's like aggressive. That's what Godsmack is. So that's what I'm most hyped for. The new Godsmack album.
Alrighty. Well, on that note, we wrap up this particular episode of the Jam CT podcast's as yet untitled new thing. But come back in 2 days' time where we will be talking about the new albums from SZA and Little Sims. We're excited to dig deep into those things that happened in December. August, send us home.
As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Burger King. I'm loving it.